everyone. This is Laura. I'm with LCH, Health and Community Services. Just want to welcome everyone to our first live streamed Chats with Friends, or Charlas Entre Amigos, with LCH Health and Community Services and the Domestic Violence Center of Chester County. These chats are going to take place about once a month. Feel free to join the conversation with us now, or you can check back and add information or questions in the chat box. We are here. So we will let Alyssa and Daphne take it away.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Daphne and I'm a caseworker at LCH in social assistance. And
I'm Melissa. I work at the Domestic Violence Center as a counselor and outreach advocate at the West Grove office.
So today we're talking about setting healthy boundaries, and we're going to start by finding out what they are. So Alyssa, can you help us understand what a boundary is?
Yeah, so I think there's often a lot of confusion around what boundaries are. And I think a lot of times the confusion comes where people are trying to say that others should be doing X, Y, Z to honor their boundaries. A boundary, when I'm defining it, and as we talk about it here today, is going to be something where it's specific comfort zones, lines, however you want to visualize it, that keeps you comfortable, safe, things that you feel make it better for your life as well. A boundary is something that honors our integrity and our authenticity, and it's something that we all have in some degree, and it's a skill that we learn throughout our lives as well.
So they're like rules, they're limits that you create to identify what is reasonable, what is permissible, what's okay and not okay for how others behave towards you or around you, and how you respond when others step outside these your rules, your boundaries.
Yeah, I like the idea of defining it as, your personal rules, right? So they might vary from work to personal life to even specific relationships. And there are some boundaries that will be the same across the board, and there are some boundaries that are going to be very situation specific. But they are your rules, which means that you're the one who is honoring them at the end of the day. Ideally in healthy, productive relationships, individuals will choose to honor those boundaries. They'll ask if they don't know. They'll honor whatever you say. And I know that that's not always the case, but that's an ideal situation in a healthy relationship.
All right. And now, how do we express healthy boundaries?
So when we're talking about boundaries, it's, again, kind of tying back to earlier, a lot of it kind of boils down to that we can't expect others to necessarily honor that. And that sounds really counterintuitive, right? Because if I'm interacting with individuals, I would hope that they would choose to honor my boundaries, that they respect me enough to do so. And at the end of the day, sometimes either people don't know and or they choose not to honor it for whatever reason. So we can only really control our own actions in all of this. So we define the space that we're comfortable. And if somebody decides that that space isn't valid for whatever reason, we get to decide how we respond. Telling someone, stop doing this, don't do this to me, only gets so far, I think. And it's more effective when, we have very specific rules and specific consequences, I think, if somebody is stepping over our boundaries. Those consequences can vary from the situation again, and they might be just natural consequences. An example I like to give a lot is if you don't accept calls after a certain time for work. So maybe you turn your work phone off after 5 p.m., right? That's a pretty normal boundary to have. And so that's something to consider, that boundaries are not these like grandiose things all the time. A lot of times they're things that we do in our day-to-day lives that we might not even be aware of.
So it's really important to communicate these boundaries, right? To make them clear to the other person. And one thing that I can really appreciate what you said is that we can only control ourselves. We can't control others. So we're not responsible for anyone else's feelings or how they react to our boundaries. Mm-hmm. And that shouldn't hold us back from establishing them, from creating them, from making decisions that it relates back to our own well-being, that protects our own well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true, because at the end of the day, I honor my well-being, Daphne, you honor your well-being, and we do that with our boundaries. We do that with our actions, our words, whatever we feel is appropriate in the circumstances. And I do think that that's often lost in translation, for lack of a better word, just because a lot of times it is, I see how important my boundary is. Why can't they? Right. And that's not always how it works. Like, a lot of times individuals, if they are stepping over our boundaries, they may not know. We might not even know what our full boundaries are, not until we've explored them and we give ourselves space to do that. So I think that's an important point to make as well.
And what do boundaries look like in a toxic relationship?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And sort of my wheelhouse, right? So I do work with survivors of domestic violence. I would say that in a toxic and even abusive relationships, because they're not entirely the same thing, a lot of times the boundaries that we have as individuals, we may put to the side. We may not honor them. We may let people step over them. And that's honestly to keep ourselves safe. If you're in an abusive situation, the individual who is trying to harm you is trying to exert power over you. They're trying to exert control over you. And if they are unable to do those things, violence may happen in the form of a variety of different types of abuse, right? Like psychological, verbal, physical. And so a lot of times it's just easier to say yes, or it's easier to just not acknowledge it. And I think that is probably something that happens a lot in toxic relationships, abusive ones, because it's the fear of like rocking the boat. I'd rather just internalize what's happening to me. My boundaries don't matter. Maybe I am overreacting, and I don't have to acknowledge the harm that's actually occurring.
So in a healthy relationship, we should be able to freely express our needs, our wants. We define what's okay and what's not okay in the relationship, and it should be respected. And in an unhealthy relationship, then the other person will try to either disregard your wishes. They may try to manipulate you by arguing against or pushing back or minimizing your needs or your wants. Mm-hmm. So something to keep in mind. So what are some healthy boundaries to have in a relationship?
So that obviously will vary by individuals. My boundaries might not be the same as others. And as long as the people in the relationship are in agreement for what that boundary is and what those boundaries look like, then that's great, because we have our individual boundaries. We might have boundaries that we experience as, a couple in a relationship. Some of the main key factors, though, that I kind of like to mention is just that, there's certain things of like having separate lives, so maybe I have different hobbies, different groups of friends, different interests, work, different types of things that I do than my partner. And that's fine. And that's totally normal. And that's totally okay, because we have existed as human beings before we met our partner. We will continue to exist as human beings afterwards. And it's good to cultivate those things that bring us joy and those things that make us happy. And so that takes the form in a lot of different ways in our lives as well.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I, for one, occasionally meet up with my friends. I think we were talking about this earlier, that my husband does not enjoy art galleries nor museums, and something that I really relish, I love. And so every now and then, occasionally, I get together with a group of my friends, and it's an all-day event for us. We go to the museum, we have some lunch or some dinner, and so it's a time for me to connect with those things that I love and enjoy, and it gives him his space as well. So yeah. So is there anything else that we may want to touch on?
Yeah,
I think we were talking earlier. I think we were talking earlier about how sometimes it's if you have not done it before, how difficult it is to establish boundaries. If you haven't, as a child, learned those skills, I think as an adult it can be a little bit difficult. Establishing those limits, those boundaries, can make you feel uncomfortable. You may doubt yourself. But it's a skill that needs to be honed for your own well-being.
Yeah, and there's so many instances in our lives where we have boundaries, and I think sometimes we don't even recognize that we do. But I do agree with you, Daphne, that it starts in childhood, right? Someone having poor boundaries as an adult most likely had poor boundaries as a child, and that's to no fault of theirs. That's to the people who were raising them, who expected them to have these porous boundaries to begin with, and who stepped over them, minimized them, blamed them for whatever capacity was there. And we take that with us, and learning to assert ourselves with our boundaries and where our comfort zone is super important. But it's a skill that we don't ever stop developing. It's a skill that's going to change. It may change because of situations. My boundaries at work may be different than my boundaries at home. And it may change after self-reflection. I may have a boundary today that may change in the future. And that's also okay, because that means we're growing and we're recognizing where our comfort actually is.
So we really do need to take the time and look inward. If we start noticing that we feel resentful, unappreciated, or we feel stress, anxiety, those are all those negatives may be a red flag that maybe boundaries have been crossed. Maybe we don't even know what they are, but then it's a time for reflection, a time to, explore what they are and address them, so that we have a better sense of well-being, self-esteem.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Daphne and Alyssa, thank you so much for sharing some really important information about setting boundaries, healthy boundaries, having that conversation. For those out there listening on our Facebook page and checking back, help is always here. LCH and DVCCC work together every day to help bridge services and bridge care, for LCH as a community health center, for DVCCC, who specializes in domestic violence. So please check out their websites and phone numbers, and I'll just read those out loud. So domestic violence's website is www.dvccpa.org. LCH's is www.lchcommunityhealth.org. And then our phone number at LCH is 610-444-7550. And then at domestic violence is 610-431-1430. Our Spanish chat will be at 4:00 today. And we really appreciate Daphne and Alyssa sharing with us. Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you. Bye.